So if you recall from 1 or 2 weeks back, I'll just try and centre that a bit better. I'm doing a series on Elisha, and this is the second one. We thought about the call of Elisha 2 or 3 weeks ago, can't remember when quite. This morning we're going to think about the double portion prophet and the famous story of Elijah being taken up to heaven. Now I don't know whether you're the kind of person that likes a second portion. I mean, you know, sometimes who doesn't really? So, especially if it's something you really like. You know, someone says, "Would you like another piece?" And you think, "Yeah, I would." Well, Elisha is famed for being the guy that asked for a second portion, but not of cheesecake or a nice cake or something, but of the Spirit. And the important thing about this story, I mean, it's a wacky story, of course. I mean, it's pretty unique and wild. But I want you to remember that this isn't myth, okay? I don't believe it's myth or legend. I believe this is history. Okay, it's pretty strange history and history that's probably out of our experience, but that doesn't mean to say it's not true. Okay, so it's a longer reading this time. This is 2 Kings chapter 2, and this is the story. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elijah said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." And so they went down to Bethel. The company of prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied. "So be quiet." Shut up, I don't want to talk about it. It's the worst kept secret, this disappearance of Elijah. But then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." And so they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha, here he goes again, and asked him, "Don't you know the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So the 2 of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the 2 of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the 2 of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in 2. Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah, struck the water with it. "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. The company of the prophets from Jericho who were watching said, "The spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha." And they went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. "Look," they said, "we your servants have 50 able men. Let them go and look for your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has picked him up and set him down in some mountain or in some valley," like you do, you know. "No," Elisha replied, "do not send them." But they persisted until he was too embarrassed to refuse. And so he said, "Send them." And they sent 50 men who searched for 3 days but did not find him. When they returned to Elisha, who was staying in Jericho, he said to them, "Didn't I tell you not to go?" What a story. I mean, come on. Okay. So a few musings. That's all I do with these passages. I muse on them and see what comes up in my mind. Anyway, my first thought was just about Elisha's persistence, really. You get this, it's got to be important in the story, that you get this 3 times when when Elijah tries to kind of leave him behind and say, "No, don't follow me. I'm going to Bethel, then I'm going to Jericho, then I'm going to the Jordan. You stay here." And whether this is all a bit of a test, I suspect it might be. It might be that Elijah doesn't seem to be, too easily persuaded to take him along. So maybe it's all a bit of a test, and Elijah's saying, how persistent are you? How determined are you? But it made me think that if he'd said, "Yeah, this is going to be a difficult day. It's going to be a difficult time to be parted from my mentor and master and the prophet who's been looking after me for these last 2 years since the call," or whatever it was. Some people think it's about 2 years since his call. He could easily have been put off, but he's not. He's persistent and he's determined. The prophets also seem to be, trying to throw doubt in his mind. He's going to be taken from you today, and that also could be, I don't want to face that. And it's just you sense this need for persistence in this story. For him to get to the point where he could ask for the double portion, he has to be persistent, to keep going, keep following, and pressing in. And that reminds me really that often that is the case. It often is the way with God, that you just need to keep being persistent. Sometimes you'll get all sorts of reasons why you can give up on something. People might say, "Oh, you couldn't do that," or circumstances seem to intervene. But he keeps going. And I remember that was my own story. I first sensed a call to ministry, if you call it that, whatever you want to call it anyway, pastoring in my 20s when I was still in a Baptist church, and I went and had a bit of an informal interview at Spurgeon's College. But for one reason or another, it didn't work out in my 20s. And then for a long time, I kind of didn't really come back to it. But then, as you know, we moved into the Church of England, and I then went through that process of going right through to the end of the Church of England process, and again got refused. Now, at this point, I could have thought, okay, maybe God's telling me something. But I had some words of confirmation and sensed that I should keep going, and somebody gave me this word about planting a church with Vineyard. And so, and then here we are. I mean, some of you probably wish I'd given up, one or two steps back, and I get that. But I just said, sometimes we can just sense, it's a difficult line, isn't it, to know, is this God saying no to this? Or is it just that I need to keep pressing in and keep being determined? And I think if you need to keep pressing in, you'll kind of know that. But you do need to be determined. And I think even whatever God calls us to, you will find sometimes that it's quite hard and you need to press in. I'm sure you can identify with that in different ways in your life. But it's just a case of pressing in. Elisha does that. He won't be put off. He keeps going with Elijah. And in the end, he gets what he wants. Okay, so we move on to this, this double portion that he asks for. Now, let me say from the start that when he says to Elijah, "I want a double portion of your spirit," he doesn't mean particularly something in Elijah himself, but he wants the Spirit of God that's in Elijah. That's what he's talking about. So he's seen the Spirit of God working in this prophet over many years, and he says, I know I need that, and I want that. But he doesn't just ask for what Elijah's had. He has this really daring, bold request. He says, I want a double portion. And what it actually means in the Hebrew is that he's, in Hebrew life, the sons would inherit the father's property. It was that patriarchal society. But the firstborn son would get a double portion. So if there was, say, 3 sons, there would be 4 portions, and the eldest son would get half, and the other 2 would get a quarter. And that's in Hebrew what he asks for. He says, I want the firstborn son's double portion, which is an amazing request, really. Now, some commentators think that he's just saying, well, I want to follow in your footsteps. I want to inherit your spirit. But he's already been called, and that's already happened at his call. So I do think that there's a sense in which he's asking for more than even Elijah had, the guy who called down fire on the altar. And from what we'll read in future weeks about what happens in Elisha's life, I think God grants it to him. He does more miracles than anybody else in the Old Testament. More miracles in the Bible than anybody except Jesus. So he does get an amazing thing. Okay. But one of the things that struck me when I was musing was just Elijah's generosity to Elisha. He doesn't sort of say, I mean, if somebody comes up to me and said, I'd like twice as much as you've got, you cheeky monkey, Ugh. But he doesn't say that. He kind of says, well, I think it could happen, and we'll talk about the conditions in a minute. He has this generosity of spirit and seems to have a lack of competition with Elisha. It's almost like he wants him to go further than he has. And that should be always our spirit in the church and with each other, that we want other people to outstrip what we do. And I just love that about Elijah, that he doesn't sort of get uppity about it, about that request, which seems a little bit cheeky on the face of it, and maybe it is, but he goes with it. And I think that's to Elijah's credit. And because of that, I sense that we can have all sorts of motives, can't we, for asking for more from God, more in terms of spiritual gifts or whatever. But I sense that with Elisha, this request isn't about personal ambition, because I don't think God would have granted it to him if it was. But he does have an ambition to do more for God. I think that's the key. So we can be I think we can be ambitious as Christians, but it's an ambition for the kingdom, and it's an ambition to see God's working for others in a greater way. I think he also has a realization of just his need. There's just this sense that he knows he's going to be taking over the mantle of what Elijah has been doing. He knows his time has come to be the prophet to Israel. And I sense that he just senses, I just need more. I need more than I've got to face all the challenges ahead. So I sense that Elisha has a pure heart in terms of why he wants this, why he's asking for it. So his character is matching his desire. Now there's this weird condition that Elijah gives him. He says, well, okay, but you need to see me when I'm taken up to heaven. If you do, you'll get it. If you don't, you won't. So that's a strange kind of condition about getting this double portion of his spirit. And I was musing about that and thinking, well, why is that the condition? Why is that the condition? Well, the things that surround this taking up of Elijah into heaven are pretty weird, aren't they? I mean, they're pretty strange and probably pretty scary, I would have thought. So I think when this is happening and this chariot of fire and chariot of horses on fire and flames and then the whirlwind, it would be very easy to get distracted, I think. I mean, I might get very distracted and sort of look away at the wrong minute. But he has to keep this focus. Also, I think there's something about not giving in to fear. I think that's key in this. I mean, if it was me and you get the impression they're walking along side by side and suddenly this chariot comes and separates them. I mean, I'd be pretty afraid and probably, I don't know what I'd do really, probably fall to the ground and shut my eyes or something. So he doesn't give in to fear. He's not afraid, even though something very strange is happening around him. And I think also, whenever in the Bible you get these encounters with the heavenly realm, such as as I was called and so on, there's this sense of not being able to stand before it, Same with Ezekiel when he gets these weird visions. But somehow he seems to be able to stand the presence of God in what's happening around him. So that there must be this kind of purity of heart. Otherwise, I think he just wouldn't be able to stand it. So those are my musings about why the condition is there. He doesn't get distracted, and that's really important. He has pure motives, and he doesn't give in to fear. My last musing on this particular part of the story was also this thing that Elijah says, well, it's a very difficult thing you've asked for. It's very difficult and very hard thing. What does he mean by that? Well, he doesn't mean it's hard for God, okay? I mean, God can give double portions, triple portions, quadruple portions, or whatever he wants, any time. I think the difficult thing is for Elisha to be in the position to receive it. That's where the difficulty is. To receive strong anointing, you have to have a heart that is ready for it. You have to be in the right place for it. To be able to carry that anointing that he carries, as we'll see in the stories that go ahead. So the difficult thing is, Elijah is kind of saying, is your heart ready for it? This audacious request, is your heart ready for it? And it got me to thinking about, well, you know, he says, to Elijah, what would you like? What can I do for you before I go? I wonder what would you ask for? What would you have asked for in this situation? Maybe you might say, well, I just want protection. You know, it's a dangerous time in Israel's life. I don't know, all sorts of things he could have asked for, but he asked for this double portion of the Spirit of God. And it got me thinking, well, how ambitious am I really for the things of God and for the kingdom? How much would I really want that to happen for me? Okay, so that's the double portion. And building up the character of Elisha and why he gets what he gets. He is determined and he's loyal, he's ambitious for God. And that's part of what we need to be too. And I couldn't leave this story as well without saying a little bit about the departure. I mean, this is a unique story in the Bible. No one else gets taken up to heaven like this. And I was wondering why. Why does God do this? And the Bible doesn't really tell us, but anyway, here's a couple of thoughts. Maybe it's something to do with his close walk with God. There's only one other person in the Old Testament who doesn't die a natural death, and that's a guy called Enoch in Genesis 5. And I didn't put the scripture up, but it just reads this. Altogether, Enoch lived 365 years. It's only a couple of verses. Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more because God took him away. And from that, I just get the impression that both Enoch and maybe Elijah had such a close walk with God that almost the transition between heaven and earth was so thin that he was able to go without dying. I don't know, that's just my thought maybe. Maybe it was because he didn't want Elijah being made an idol, revering his bones or whatever, I don't know. But I think it does say something to us, this strange moving up in the whirlwind. It says something about death. Firstly, that it isn't. This is probably the normal way, that we just transition into heaven. I mean, the abnormal way is to die. That was never what we were designed for. Most of us do, I'm sure, unless we get the rapture and he comes again, we will experience death. But I think it's also a picture of what happens. It's almost like that God comes and takes him. But it is that God comes and takes him. And whilst, we won't face death in the same way, I think it is a picture of what happens to us spiritually. Jesus said, didn't he, that I'll come and take you to be where I am. And that's my belief, that he does. For us who are believers, he comes and just transitions us and takes us to be with him. Not through a whirlwind, I know, but spiritually that's what he does. So, and this story also reminds me that heaven and earth are closer than we think. You know, they are. We don't see into the heavenly realm very often. Occasionally, people get glimpses of it, and in the Bible we see it sometimes when angels come and strange things happen. But heaven and earth are closer than we think. It's just that we don't get the spiritual sight sometimes to see it. But we feel it sometimes in our beings and in our bodies as the Spirit comes. But heaven is around us. It's what it is. It's the airs. It's around us. And I need to remember that sometimes, that heaven is never far away from me. And the realm of heaven is not far away from me. Sometimes we just think it's somewhere very remote, but it isn't. It's very close. Okay, I've forgotten to click through those. We're getting towards the end. I just wanted to say something also about transitions. I think this story does speak into transitions, and we all face transitions in life, those moments of change. And this is certainly a transition moment for Elisha. So whether it's in jobs, you know, a new job or a new boss, a new office, a new way of working, you know, all those strange transitions that are often thrown on us. Family things, kids moving out from home and all that sort of thing, moving house, handing over ministries, losing people in our lives, societal change even, which sometimes these transitions are something we choose, but often they're not. And I think it's just interesting how Elisha faces this particular challenge of transition. I can't remember that I put any of this up. Oh, yeah, I'll just come to that in a minute. He tears his clothes after Elisha's gone, and that in the Old Testament was always, and in their culture, was a symbol of sadness and loss. So he feels deeply this moment of loss of Elijah in his life. He says this very strange phrase, "Oh, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And that, you'll see actually in the later stories, is something that somebody says to Elisha himself towards the end of his life. And it seems to be a kind of phrase which means something like, "You are the power of this country. You know, you're the key person in our life." So he's facing this moment of vulnerability and uncertainty, and as he steps forward towards the river, he says, where now is the God of Elijah? So there's this sense of vulnerability and sadness and uncertainty, and transitions do that to us very often. Some people find transitions easier to deal with than others and change, but many of us like routine, depending on your personalities and so on. And find transition, I don't find it easy. But what I see is that even though Elisha is showing some of those things, he still trusts in God, and that God is in the change. He says, you know, "Where are you?" But then he takes that step of faith with the cloak and strikes the river with it. And God is there because he parts the river again. And what I've learned to try and remember, and it's not easy in these moments of transition and change, is that God is in it. He will never leave us. And he's bigger than the challenge and the change and the transition that we're facing. So it's just keeping that hold of that in those moments. Right. And my very last musing, just to say something quickly about the miracle of the river Jordan and this crossing over. This is the first miracle that Elisha does, as far as we know. And he replicates something that Elijah has already done when they cross over and then they cross back. So the mantle has passed from Elijah to Elisha, but the power of God hasn't disappeared. It's still there. And I think in this particular miracle, we're meant to see a connection with Moses and the Red Sea and the parting of the waters there. And also when Joshua came into the promised land, he did the same thing and parted the Jordan River so they could cross over. The whole nation could cross over into the promised land. So there's something about reminding, and we, at this point at least we know that there are this 50-odd prophets who are watching on and seeing this, and they see what Elisha does. And I think God is saying something in this miracle about the fact that God is still working. He's still with Elisha and in the nation. And if you know anything about the context of Elisha's ministry, amazingly, it's with the northern kingdom of Israel, so it's after the nation has split into Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And Israel in the north never had a good king. I mean, in the south, in Judah, they had some good kings, but never in the north. They were always idolaters. Some were a little bit better than others, but they were basically all bad. So it was a pretty dark time in the history of Israel. But I think that he's saying to Elisha, I'm still working. Even in the darkness of idolatry, even with bad leadership, and as we'll see again in the later stories, there's this constant threat of war from the nations around them. I don't know about you, but idolatry, bad leadership and threat of war, I mean, that has some sort of resonance in my mind at the moment. And I think it's saying to them and it's saying to us too, look, I'm still at work. I'm still working, even in this difficult situation. And it's witnessed by the prophets, and they know, and they bow before him and say, the Spirit of God is on you, and they're ready to follow him. So I think there's something in that, in the miracle that is reminding us that God is still working in our world. And he won't let us go. He won't let us go. So I'm coming to my end. And thinking about the character of Elisha in this story, he is determined, he's loyal, he's ambitious for God, and he trusts God, even in these moments of uncertainty, when he's not quite sure what's going to happen now. What happens next? Now Elijah's gone. But he's determined, and he trusts him. And I want those kind of characteristics in my own life. I don't know about you, but I need to be more determined. I need to be more ambitious, and I need greater faith, and I trust that God will give it to us in this time. Let's stand.